So, my name is Mara Kobe, and I want to share some information with you about our world language programs and how they articulate all the way from elementary into middle and to high school to help you with some choices you'll be making about master schedules, scheduling for students, and so on. So, again, as I said, I'm Mara Kobe. This is how you can contact me. I will share that information again at the end of this screencast. So, before we even get started about what you can offer, what's already happening in the district, some changes happened over the summer about the UNC system entrance requirements. And so, we're going to talk about that first, and then I'll get into what we can do locally to meet those requirements, recommendations, and so on. So, first of all, we want to talk about the idea that the UNC system has decided to offer some flexibility in the minimum requirements for them to consider students for admission. And so they have shifted from the required 2 years of thou shalt have 2 years of a world language to we want you to have 2 credits of something that could be world language or to offer more flexibility for some students. However, the wording that they are using is very specific to say that it's still recommended to have at least 2 years of a sequential world language courses, whether that's levels 1 and 2, levels 3 and 4. They are still recommending at least those 2 years. This is what also went out in the newsletter from the UNC system to school counselors back in May. That although those minimum requirements are the cornerstone of the policy, all students are encouraged to pursue challenging and rigorous courses that are aligned with their academic and career objectives. It also says very clearly in this newsletter that completing those minimum course requirements does not guarantee admission to the schools in the UNC system, and that students should consult with their counselors about what's recommended, especially for those that are going to have more selective admission standards. We can guess which ones those are. We know which ones those are. So then this newsletter goes on to tell you that students really should consider taking the most rigorous courses available, even if you've already met the minimum requirements. And it still says students are encouraged to complete at least 2 world language courses. So that's the district's stance on this as well. We know that not all students are going to go to those 16 schools in the UNC system, and we don't want to limit them to only possibly meeting the minimum requirements for the schools in the system that would admit them. So we are still recommending that students still take at least 2 years of the same world language. And just to show you why we're worried about that, I'm going to give you some excerpts from some of the schools that our students consider. So Chapel Hill, for example, we know that they're a little bit more selective. And on their own page, it says, although the 16 schools share the same minimum course requirements, these minimum credentials do not guarantee admission, and successful candidates typically exceed them. And previously, we had heard through the grapevine that they were looking for students who had 3 or 4 years of a world language for most programs at Chapel Hill. UNC Charlotte, on their own page, even says the state of North Carolina requires these minimum course requirements to be considered for admission. Keep in mind that most admitted first-year students exceed these requirements. And on the North Carolina A&T's page, and I can tell that this has been updated because it's reflecting the science changes that are here, it still actually says that they're looking for students with at least 2 years of the same foreign language or world language. So, all right, that's just a sampling. We know other schools will be somewhat selective or less selective. What about the ones that are not part of the 16 schools in the UNC system? So we thought we'd take a little look. Duke still requires a minimum of 3. Elon requires 2, recommends 3. Gardner-Webb, Wake Forest, Howard University, University of South Carolina, University of Virginia, University of Florida, they all say a minimum of 2, and we know that they are being more selective and usually looking for students with 3 or more. So it doesn't make sense for us to steer students away from at least those 2 years of a world language. We don't want to shut doors before the students even leave our campuses. That's not fair. So now that that's all been said, and we have framed why we're here to talk about world languages, let's talk about what we are able to offer and what we currently offer in the district. So, unfortunately, my Arabic program has been phased out this year. So, going forward, next year, these are the courses that are offered in the district. So, sign language, Chinese, French, German, Japanese, Latin, Spanish, and of course, for our Spanish for native or heritage speakers, those are options. At most of our schools, we are offering opportunities to get to an AP level or an IB level. Some of our schools are offering Cambridge pathways as well. And of course, we have our dual language immersion programs in 5 languages. You can see that on this particular slide. So, how do we make sure that we schedule our students for success? At this point, you're a middle school or a high school and you're worried about, do they have any language experience coming to me? And if not, what are we going to be able to offer for our students? And if they do, what can we offer our students? So, just some good things to keep in mind. Students should not skip levels in the middle of a world language sequence. If they have never spoken that language before, jumping from level 3 to AP does not make any sense. Jumping from level 1 to 3 does not make any sense. Skipping level 1 if they've never had the language before does not make any sense. Or my personal favorite, scheduling level 2 prior to level 1 does not make any sense. There are exceptions. If a student has prior language experience, they may be a heritage or native speaker of that language, even if they're not a multilingual learner who's ESL served or has an LEP, but they may speak another language at home. There are going to be some students who were formerly in our dual language immersion programs, whether they came out in 5th grade or they stayed with the program through 8th grade. That changes what pathways we should consider for them in middle school and high school. And then if students have studied abroad, they will have been immersed in the language and culture and will have acquired more language proficiency. They might be in a place where they could move from level 2 into the IB diploma level courses without taking level 3 because they had that semester or a full summer or a full year experience in that language. Additionally, if they are looking at possibly skipping a level, or wanting to start their sequence at a higher level than level 1, they might also be interested in the credit by demonstrated mastery process. We'll talk a tiny bit about that later as well. All right. This has come up 4 times in the past 2 weeks. Please do not place a brand new student with no prior language experience into a level 1 course after midterms of that course. They will not be successful. And even if somehow they were to eke out a passing grade for only having had 8 weeks or 6 weeks of a language, they will be at a severe disadvantage if they try to move on to level 2. So please find another place for a student who comes in after midterms. Do not have them try to start their language sequence with that type of a short runway. All right. Multilingual learners and world language courses. You cannot assume that because a student speaks a language that they are literate in that language. We have students who come to us with interrupted formal education. We have all kinds of variables. So this document that's linked here, I'm actually going to go through a couple of the pieces step by step with you, but there's a full document you can download here from the slide deck. It's also shared in the resources for you. So we want to talk about what are some best practices when you want to place a multilingual learner, especially a newcomer, into a world language course. So the first step, talk to the student. Does the student want to build literacy in their first language if that language is offered in their building? Now, if their first language is Turkish and you don't offer Turkish, that's not an avenue we can pursue. But if their first language is Spanish or French and it's something that's offered in your building, or Chinese, then that's something we would want to discuss. Does the student have another language that is offered in your building or through North Carolina Virtual that they would prefer to study? And here's the really other thing to consider, especially for our newcomers. Is the student ready to add a third language while they're acquiring English? Because English is now their second or their third language. And do we want to add one more language that's new to that? So if the options to build literacy in their first language exist, we would work with the department chairperson to do a placement test of their first language if that's an option. So if Spanish is their first language and Spanish is taught in your building, you would work with the department chairperson to do a placement test. The FAQs on the back of this handout actually explain what that placement test should look like. And the department chair can always reach out to me if they're not sure. So we would start there. If it is not available, reach out to me and I will be happy to help you figure out an option for a placement test. I will tell you that at least 85% of the students that come into us who are coming in, they have that language background, but they may not have had consistent formal education all the way through high school in that language. Usually level 2 is a good starting point for them. If your school offers Spanish for native speakers and they are a Spanish speaker, then Spanish for native speakers would be the appropriate course. But again, that placement test usually determines if level 2 is the right place. Every so often we have some who really belong in level 3. And I think there's been a unicorn or two that was ready for level 4, but that is never the first place we put them. If they are a newcomer that's coming into 11th or 12th grade, so like we had a student from Spain come into one of our schools as an 11th grader. Okay, yeah, they've had significant literacy instruction, uninterrupted. Yes, they were ready for an advanced class, but the majority of the students in your buildings, that is not the case. So again, level 2 or Spanish for native speakers 1 is usually the starting point for about 85% of our students. So if they start in level 2 or the native speakers 1 class, the next progression of courses would be going from level 2 to honors 3 or native speakers 1 into honors native speakers 2. If native speakers 2 is not available for some reason, honors 3 is an acceptable next step after native speakers 1. So after that, if they go into a third course, they would proceed into an honors 4 equivalent. So honors 4 or the IB standard level 1 or the Cambridge AS level if that's in your building. After completing those 3 courses in sequence, the option to go into the next level for the IB diploma courses or an AP course could be available. Students, again, could choose to do the credit by demonstrated mastery process in their first language, and those scores, we use an assessment for that. Those scores and that assessment could also be used towards their global languages endorsement. Again, the actual document that you can download is available, has FAQs about who to contact for the credit by demonstrated mastery process and so on. Just to give you an idea of what this looks like, if somebody is taking a traditional language trajectory, they start in level 1, go to level 2, go to level 3, then to honors 4 or the equivalent Cambridge AS or IBSL1. But if they're a heritage speaker, they would actually start with Spanish for native speakers if it's available. If it's not available, or if it's French or it's German or Chinese, the closest equivalent is starting their sequence in level 2. And this graphic comes directly from DPI from the World Languages Standard Course of Study. This is not new. This has been in your hands since 2009. So the final step, once you've had all these conversations or done any placement tests or whatever, there could still be the option. So a student may be from a country where their home language is not something that we offer, but their second language was actually French. And so maybe that's something they want to continue to study. As long as it will not create a hardship while they are acquiring English and getting acclimated to being in your school, absolutely that's an option for them to continue to pursue. All right. So the instructional tenets state very clearly that middle schools and K-8 schools and 612 schools must offer a world language course for high school credit. Usually that starts with level 1 part A in 7th grade and level 1 part B in 8th grade. There are a multitude of reasons why we split this over 2 years for middle school, based on brain development, based on usually your schedule. In the middle school, 60 minutes every other day is not enough for a student to make it through and be comfortable using language of a full high school credit course. When you do the scheduling, you cannot combine level 1 part A with level 1 part B. You cannot combine an exploratory or middle school Spanish in the same class as a level 1 part A or level 1 part B. It does not make sense. They have to each be their own course. You cannot combine Spanish for native speakers with level 1 or any non-credit course. And just to clarify, exploratory that they might take in the 6th grade is the exact same course with the exact same standards from NCDPI as what we are calling middle school French or middle school Spanish. If they take it in 6th grade as exploratory, they may not repeat it at any other time in middle school. If they don't take it in 6th grade and they take middle school French or middle school Spanish in 7th grade, they cannot repeat it in the 8th grade. They've already taken the course. They've already met all the standards. Novice low proficiency is novice low proficiency. There's nowhere to go. They should be in a high school credit sequence if they're going to continue to take it each year. Now, when we're talking about high schools, you're not worried about part A and part B, of course, but we don't combine level 1 with level 2. We don't combine level 1 with honors 4. We don't combine level 2 with AP. You just don't do that with level 1 or level 2. They need to be their own courses. Now, and so that goes without saying, you would not put level 2 with the AP because it doesn't make any sense that something that gets AP weighted grades would be in the same room at the same time as something that is a standard level course. All level 1 and 2 courses for traditional languages are non-honors. Anything that's level 3 or higher is inherently honors. There's no such thing as a standard level 3. Spanish for native speakers sequence, because SNS 1 starts at the equivalent of traditional level 2, honors native Spanish for native speakers level 2 is closer to an honors 3. So again, we don't combine the honors with non-honors. We don't combine AP with non-honors. We don't combine the IB diploma level or the Cambridge AS level with non-honors. We also, if you were to combine, let's say you wanted to combine Honors Spanish 4 and IB SL1, you can't do that. The grade points are weighted differently. So if you are going to combine them all in the same room at the same time, they all need to be coded as IB SL1 so that they all get the same weighted grade opportunity. So this has been in place quite some time. If you have questions, please reach out. I'm happy to support. Also for IB students, please make sure that they are taking their courses in the correct sequence. This might require that they double up in 9th grade or 10th grade if they didn't start with level 1 in middle school. They have to complete Honors Level 3 MYP or Honors Level 3 by the end of 10th grade so that they can be in the SL1 course when they are in the 11th grade. They may have completed level 3 even sooner than that and may have started their diploma level courses even earlier, but they must be done with the prerequisites by the end of 10th grade to be in the diploma level classes starting in 11th grade. If you need to double them up in 1 year or they need to take a summer course, that is an option. All right, so for articulating from middle school into high school, we have a whole lot of scenarios. One thing to keep in mind, we don't want there to be a large gap between finishing level 1 and going into level 2, or finishing level 2 and going into level 3. We want the language, it's just like riding a bicycle or playing a sport or an instrument. They need to be continuing and using the language for those skills to stay sharp. We know that our more selective universities are looking for students who start their world language pathways earlier and continue into advanced levels of language through 11th and 12th grade. We also know that just taking regular level 1 and 2 will not lead to a high level of language proficiency. And again, as we said earlier, we want to make sure that our students have that opportunity to develop their language skills well and open as many doors as possible for them. So this is a typical middle school sequence into high school that you might see. So they might take that exploratory in 6th grade. It's not a requirement. They don't have to. They can take a CTE class, an art class, doesn't matter, because there's no prerequisite for level 1 part A. Again, we talked about earlier, 7th grade level 1 part A. They have to successfully complete that to be able to take level 1 part B. If they failed it, they may not continue in the sequence. And once they've successfully completed level 1 part A and successfully completed level 1 part B, then the next step would be to move to level 2 in the 9th grade. We don't want them to wait till 10th or 11th grade to take level 2. That they'll have to start over with their language proficiency and they'll get frustrated. That's not fair. Now, what if they're a native or heritage speaker of a language or a former dual language immersion student who decided not to stay in the program after 5th grade? There are a bunch of possibilities of what that could look like in middle school. I'm not going to read to you everything that's on this slide, but you can see very clearly that they don't have to take anything in 6th grade unless they want to. If native speakers is an option and Spanish is their language, there's a sequence for that. If it isn't offered, North Carolina Virtual Level 2 is an option to take starting in 7th grade. Again, this is usually if they're a native or heritage speaker, or they could wait till 8th grade and take level 2 in the 8th grade. Depends on where they want to be when they get to the 9th grade and so on. For former dual language immersion students, even though they're not technically a native or heritage speaker of Spanish, for example, they still are students who could go into the native speakers class in your building. The question is, what are they going to do in 6th grade before they start that sequence in 7th grade, for those of you that are not dual language immersion K-8 schools. Anyway, so here are all the potential options. And then let's specifically talk about what the dual language immersion students coming out of any of our two-way Spanish programs or coming out of North Academy of World Languages or South Academy of International Languages. They may have, we don't do exploratory in those schools. So usually they would start with their high school credit in 6th grade instead of 7th. If they did a traditional language pathway, they would do level 1 part A in 6th grade, level 1 part B in 7th grade, level 2 in the 8th grade, go to honors level 3 in the 9th grade, and continue. Some of them may have been doing an immersion language but added a 3rd language, but they waited till 7th grade to do that. Sometimes that's an option to take level 1 and then level 2. It depends on the staffing in those buildings. That's usually only happening at a place like Sale or Null. But with our staffing lately, that has not been a common pathway, but it may be one you see on a transcript from older students. If they are continuing in their immersion language, and they would usually do their heritage immersion part A in 6th grade, it could be the Spanish for native speakers, or it could be heritage immersion Chinese part A. So part A in 6th, part B in 7th, heritage immersion 2 or native speakers 2 in the 8th grade, going on to honors 3 in the 9th grade. If they're at South Mech or North Mech, or eventually also Geringer, they would then also have that companion class of Civilization and Culture 1 in the same language. Now, the super high flying kids coming out of those programs might be recommended to go to honors 4 in the 9th grade, but that, again, that's that exception, that unicorn. That's not usually where they land. So these are students that could be coming out of a K-5 dual language immersion program from Spanish that would come to your middle school if they decided not to continue in a K-8 Spanish two-way program that would need those advanced Spanish courses in middle school. So these are the schools where that could be the case. Even though Star Mountain is no longer a dual language immersion school, some students did have that program through fourth grade and still could be following that advanced slide like we showed that had scenario A, B, C, and D on it earlier. Now, you have students when they go from high school into from middle school into high school, if they were in these K-8 programs, they will be in advanced Spanish courses when they hit your high school. Charlotte East Language Academy, their first cohort of immersion students will be in sixth grade next year, but they've had other students taking advanced Spanish classes grades 6 through 8. So they may have already completed Spanish 1 and 2 or native speakers 1 and 2. It will depend on which pathway they were in. Students coming from Sale and Null, went too far, from Sale and Null, might be in advanced courses in Chinese, French, German, Japanese, and may have added Spanish in middle school as an additional language. So we need to actually look at what they took before we place them in their classes. Lots of moving pieces. And students coming from Sale and Null may have Chinese and Spanish or French and Japanese. So we need to look at all of those options. There are also students that want to take courses we don't offer in our buildings, right? So North Carolina Virtual offers more languages than we do. I will tell you that the Arabic, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Russian will require that the students have two 45-minute live conversation coaching sessions each week, in addition to the work that they complete in their Canvas. Sometimes those sessions are going to need to take place in the evenings or after school, so keep that in mind. It may not always fit into their school day during the time that they're scheduled for their language. German, French, and Spanish. Notice that they are highlighted in yellow, which proceed with caution. Those courses do not include a whole lot of interpersonal speaking, and we don't usually recommend that those students start in level 1 unless there is no other option. Heritage speakers, because they already speak the language, it's okay for them to pursue that pathway because we know they're going to have that interpersonal speaking in another way that's not dependent on just what they're being given from NCVPS. Please also notice with German, the only levels being offered for German right now are levels 1 and 2. If you want something more advanced than that and you don't offer it in your building, please contact me for us to brainstorm some ideas for you. Notice I'm not pointing you towards Edgenuity for most of these options. The Edgenuity world language content, with very few exceptions, is about 20 years old and is all translation and grammar. That is not appropriate. That does not meet our state standards or our national standards. The few exceptions for Edgenuity for new coursework, Sign Language 1 and 2, absolutely. It's been very well developed. The AP French and the AP Spanish, because they have to meet the criteria of the College Board every year, and so those are up to date as best as they can be. If you're looking for another AP language offering that you don't have in your building, contact me and we will see what we can find for you. Now, what if students have exhausted all of the options in their building? So we have an agreement with the UNC Charlotte. It comes out of the Advanced Studies Department. I don't own this. They can get dual credit for advanced world language courses, and if funding is available, the family can be reimbursed for that coursework. The students must have successfully completed at least Honors 4, preferably if there's AP involved. They should have exhausted every single option in their building. Any form you would request, any reimbursement you would request, please go through the Advanced Studies Department. I will give you that contact person's name towards the end of this screencast. Also be aware we have students coming to us with other language opportunities outside of CMS, outside of UNC Charlotte, outside of NCVPS. We have agreements in place with our legal department to accept credits from the Bulgarian Language School of Charlotte, Hebrew High, Japanese Language School of Charlotte, and the Canada Language School. So we have those will come to us as a transcript. We add them in just like any other transfer credit, but we will accept those as concurrent credits even while the student is already enrolled in CMS during the day. Keep in mind you also have students that come to you from charter schools. So Socrates offers Greek immersion and also Spanish and Chinese. Charlotte Lab offers Spanish. Metrolina Regional Scholars Academy offers Chinese and Spanish. So some of those students may come in having taken a language since third grade, and we need to evaluate where to place them, and they may or may not have any transfer credits that they bring with them. All right, the Global Languages Endorsement. This is a huge deal. This is our state seal of biliteracy. The challenge with calling it biliteracy is that it assumes only two languages. So this is something that would be attached to a student's transcript when they graduate, but they can meet those requirements as early as middle school. The benefits of a seal of biliteracy, or the Global Languages Endorsement as we call it in North Carolina, it demonstrates multiple language competency for future employers. It's a possible advantage for showing that they've met this proficiency and it's on their transcript at the proficiency level. It could get them some college credits. They might be able to place into, let's say, a 300 or 3,000 level course, depending on how that college does their requirements. Some of them will let you take an advanced course, and if you get a B or higher, they'll give you credit for the courses below it. So there are opportunities here. This is something that actually is a credential that would go with them, even for future employers. For our multilingual learners, this helps build self-efficacy. We had students over the summer taking tests for the credit by demonstrated mastery that their scores would count for the Global Languages Endorsement. A single student was able to do this for Russian, Ukrainian, and because they lived in Portugal, also Portuguese. So assuming the student meets the English requirements for this endorsement, this student can have the Global Languages Endorsement on their transcript for English plus 3 other languages. It's fantastic. So to learn more in detail, these are bit.lys from NCDPI about the requirements, the toolkit. There's a brochure. I'm actually going to show you one of the infographics that's in the toolkit, and I've also linked to it right here on this slide. When you click on the actual infographic itself, it'll give you a link to the external assessments and all the pieces you would need to understand. Here's the short version. There are 2 different pathways, technically 3, but one of them is sort of redundancy of the second pathway, but they have to meet the requirements for both world languages as well as English language arts. At this time, if they are a multilingual learner who is also identified as such in our system, they have to demonstrate with, in our case, it's the WIDA test. They have an extra hoop to jump through as well. So let's talk about what that looks like. If you think about it, you've got your traditional learners with no previous language experience. You have students who are heritage speakers of a language at home, but they may not necessarily be ESL served or have any LEP plan in place because their English is maybe their first language and their other language is a second or third language for them. We have dual language immersion continuation students. We have students who study abroad. And then there are those multilingual learners who are identified as such and are ESL served or have LEP accommodations. So let's talk about option 1. Again, we're just talking about how to meet the world language requirements. No matter what, they still have to meet the English requirements. So option 1, student has no previous language experience. They complete their English requirements right here with the unweighted GPA, and they'll take 4 levels. Maybe it's French 1, 2, 3, 4, German 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. As long as they get that unweighted GPA for the languages they take during high school, it has to be unweighted 2.5 or higher for just those world language courses. They will check the box for the world language piece after they've also checked the box for the English piece. Here's a hint. PowerSchool automatically does the search for the level 4 course or higher. That's going to be very important in a moment. So again, these are traditional students with no prior language experience. What if they're a heritage speaker or a dual language immersion continuation student, or they've studied abroad? In other words, they have other language experience other than the classes they take. They still have to meet the English requirements no matter what. They could begin their language coursework at level 2, or some who are ready, they could do it at honors 3. Now again, the state says they have to complete 4 levels of the same language with an unweighted GPA. What it really should say is they have to complete at least level 4 or higher with an unweighted GPA of 2.5. So if they start their coursework in level 2 and they take 2, 3, and 4, or the IB Diploma SL1 class, even though they don't have a 4th course because they didn't take level 1 and they didn't go into the course beyond that, Power School is looking for the level 4 equivalent to check the box. So that student may only have 3 classes, but they still went through the threshold of that course. They have that GPA. As long as they hit that level 4, regardless of how many courses they took before it will still check the box. Option 2. Again, we meet our English requirements because we have to meet, remember, it's biliteracy, so English plus, right? And then they have to achieve a minimum language proficiency score of intermediate low, so intermediate low or higher, on any of these North Carolina approved external assessments. One of those assessments would be the AP exam, if they take that before 12th grade. So if they take AP in 11th grade, that score absolutely can count towards the Global Languages Endorsement. The stamp test that we use for level 1 and level 2 and native speakers 1 and 2 and all of those courses is another DPI approved test. So you might have a student who on their final exam coming out of level 2 scores a 4 or higher on the test, scores intermediate low, scores an intermediate mid as their composite score. Even though they didn't take a 4-course sequence, their test score shows, check, they've met at least intermediate low proficiency. If they meet it at intermediate mid or advanced low proficiency, we want to make sure we record their score and the proficiency level that they get, because that shows up on their transcript. The default, if they do it through the 4-course sequence, the default is going to be intermediate low, even though that we know their proficiency will be higher than that. So again, the school will have to enter any score if they take one of those tests, like the stamp test or the AP test or whatever. If they have that before their senior year or before January, let's say before, I think it's April of their senior year, and we have those scores that can be put in, we want to make sure that we enter them with their proficiency level so that shows up in their transcript in Power School and will count when you run the Global Languages Endorsement report. There's a whole Global Languages Endorsement user guide linked here on how to do it, screenshot, step-by-step directions, and so on. And it also shows how you can check in Power School to see if any of your students would be meeting any of the requirements for other endorsements, not just the Global Languages Endorsement. This is just a reference slide that shows the equivalency of composite stamp scores to what their proficiency levels are. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. Okay, so option 3, we said there was a third option, and that was for students to get their Global Languages Endorsement. Again, they get the English, and then it says they could use the credit by demonstrated mastery policy to establish intermediate low proficiency or higher. Well, in our case, option 3 is really option 2, because we use the stamp test because it's a well-regarded proficiency assessment. That's what we use for our credit by demonstrated mastery process here in our district in CMS. So really, option 3 is, wait, go back and look at what option 2 was. So we're not going to go ahead and go into detail there. Just to clarify about credit by demonstrated mastery, Again, that's owned by the Advanced Studies Department, but I still am involved for our world language students. It's usually for native and heritage speakers of that language. It could be for former dual language immersion students, could be students who studied abroad and lived overseas for a semester or a year. Anyone who's had extensive language experience outside of CMS, maybe they lived in Germany, their family was military. It is not really intended for students who want to skip level 1 and don't have any language experience outside of studying or with a private tutor. That is not going to be a successful attempt for the most part. So again, that global languages endorsement, we don't want to leave our multilingual learners out. They have to complete the steps for the English and for the world language, whether it's option 1 or 2. Option 3 really is option 2. But then they also have to meet proficiency expectations on what they're doing for the English language test, which in our case is currently the WIDA test. That document I referenced earlier, that guidance for scheduling multilingual learners and world language students, I've linked it here again just in case. So who do I call if I have questions about world languages, the global language endorsement, anything K-12 world languages, please reach out to me directly. If you have questions about credit by demonstrated mastery or virtual learning, so the Edgenuity options that are approved or the NCVPS options for world languages, that is Amanda Acoth. We partner together, but that really is something that comes out of her department. And then for the University of North Carolina at Charlotte High Flyers program, Caitlin Brick is your contact in the Advanced Studies Department. I am always going to support it, but I'll save you a step, go directly to Caitlin, and then she'll loop me in. All right, so here's how to contact me. If you have any questions, please feel to reach out to me. Please also check out the linked documents and slide deck that are available to you, and let's have a great year.